I remember the smell of dust and wood polish more than the words they said. It was the third Sunday after the funeral. Grandma Eloise had barely been gone a month, and already the house felt colder without her slippers shuffling down the hall. Without the murmur of the antique radio she kept on during breakfast, without the cinnamon and lavender mix she wore like a signature. The family had gathered in her living room, not to grieve, not to remember her, but to divide her. Mom sat, prim and pressed on the floral armchair, the one Grandma used to claim with a knowing smile. Aunt Renee crossed her legs like a lawyer in court. Uncle Tom stood leaning against the fireplace, arms folded, a permanent smirk stretching across his aging face. And then there was me, Lena, 24, quiet, deliberate, and apparently invisible. The lawyer read through the formalities, a monotone stream of words that barely registered until the names started rolling out like prizes at a game show. To Renee McAllister, the jewelry set from 1948, and the vintage piano. To Thomas McAllister, the main residence and all attached properties. To Margaret Moore, the summer cabin in Ellington and the 1979 Cadillac. My name didn't come, not once, not even a footnote. The room seemed to exhale as if attention had lifted. Mom looked at me for a fraction of a second, then turned away. Renee gave me a polite nod, like someone acknowledging a barista. They had done it. They had cut me out of Grandma's will. The last conversation. 3 months earlier, I sat beside Grandma on the back porch. She was wrapped in a heavy shawl even, though the air was warm. Her fingers traced the rim of her tea mug, and she looked out at the grove. "You know, Lena," she said, voice soft but steady. "When I go, they're going to scramble like vultures. It won't be about who loved me. It'll be about what they think they earned." I laughed uncomfortably. "Don't talk like that." She gave me a long look, sharp as ever. "That's the problem with this family. No one talks straight. But I'm telling you now, you've always been the only one who listened. The others, they want the house. You wanted to plant fruit trees." I smiled, cheeks flushing. I had wanted to. The land behind Grandma's house stretched far and wide, old soil, rich and neglected. I used to spend summers mapping it with chalk and hope. Then she reached into the table drawer, pulled out a thin folder and handed it to me. "Keep this safe," she said. "Don't open it yet. Just trust me." The folder, I hadn't told anyone about the folder. I hadn't even opened it. Until the day of the will. After the lawyer packed his briefcase and the cousins buzzed with their new prizes, I drove straight to my apartment, locked the door, and sat on the floor, folder in hand. Inside were 6 sheets of paper and a deed to 5.4 acres of land behind the main house, the land where I used to run barefoot, where Grandma let me paint the old fence, where I once buried a time capsule with a note that read, "For my future." It was signed over to me. Legally. Not part of the will. Separate ownership. Recorded, notarized, and filed. I stared at it for what felt like hours. A wave of something unfamiliar rose inside me. Not sadness, not joy, power. The dinner that followed. A week later, Mom invited me over for family dinner. Her texts were dry, no apologies, no mention of the will. "We're doing a little landscaping," she said while scooping mashed potatoes. "Tom wants to install a pool out back." My fork stopped midair. "Back where?" I asked, She waved her hand dismissively. You know, the side by the grove. That open land? It's all part of the property now. Might as well put it to use. My throat tightened. Aunt Renee chimed in, sipping from her wine glass. We're thinking about putting in some cottages too. Vacation rentals. Grandma's land could finally be worth something. I looked around the table. Not a single person looked at me. They were speaking about my land, my inheritance, the very place I'd dreamed of turning into an orchard. They had no idea. They thought they had won. But they forgot. One thing. I excused myself early that night. When I got home, I pulled out the deed again. My name. My signature. Grandma's handwritten. Note at the bottom. What you plant here will grow. Don't let them steal the soil from under your feet. And that's when I decided I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't fight for a seat at their broken table. Instead, I'd build my own right there, on my land, and make sure they saw it, every time they looked out their fancy glass windows. The backhoe came on a Wednesday. Loud, bright yellow, and arrogant. The kind of machine that didn't care what it crushed. It chewed into the land like it owned it, spitting roots and soil with every dig. I watched from the tree line, my arms crossed, heart still but eyes sharp. They had no permits, no surveyor, no clue, just blind entitlement and a backyard fantasy. The expansion, Mom had already posted about it on Facebook. Exciting changes to Grandma's old place. Stay tuned for our little paradise project. They weren't building a pool anymore. They were building a guest house. On my land. I didn't say a word. Not yet. Because what they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that I'd already filed a zoning complaint. Quietly. Legally. And I had emailed the county land board with a copy of my deed. They told me it could take a few weeks. So I waited. Planting day in the meantime, I made a trip to the nursery. I bought 6 young trees, peach, plum, pear. The woman at the counter looked at me curiously as I hauled them into the back of my car by myself. Starting a little orchard? She asked. I smiled. Just reclaiming one. I planted them early one morning, while the contractors were still asleep in their trucks, cups of gas station coffee steaming on their dashboards. I kept quiet, worked fast, lined them up just before the edge of the property line that divided Grandma's backyard from my land. Every time I sank a root, I thought of Grandma. Every shovel was a vow. The barbecue invitation, the first message came 3 days later. From Mom. Hey Lena, we're hosting a cookout on Sunday. Family and friends, you should come by. I stared at it. No mention of the construction. No mention of the will. No apology. Just a thin attempt at fake inclusion. Now that the landscaping was almost done. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove by early that morning. I didn't go inside. I stayed at the corner of the fence and watched. There were paper lanterns strung up on the new pergola. A rental bar out back. Laughter floated across the lot like cotton. And then I saw her, Aunt Renee, giving a tour. This is where we're thinking of putting the gazebo, she said, waving her arms like a real estate agent. The land stretches all the way back past that tree line. It's basically all ours now. I looked at the tree line. My trees were there, peeking above the horizon. She didn't even notice them. The first notice. That night, While they toasted over wine and sang 80 songs around the fire pit, an envelope slid into their mailbox. From the County Office of Land Management, stamped in red, cease and desist, unauthorized construction on private property. The morning after Mom called me at 8:47 a.m. Not a hello, not a question. Just, "Did you do this?" Her voice trembled with indignation, not shame. I took a breath. Calm. Steady. "Do what?" I asked. She spat the words like acid. "The county says part of the build is on land that doesn't belong to us." I let the pause linger. Then I said, "That's correct, it belongs to me." Silence. The kind that cuts. "You're lying," she said, almost a whisper. "No," I said. "You just never asked." The forgotten document by noon. I had emailed them a scanned copy of the deed, with Grandma's signature and the county's stamp. Attached was a formal warning from my lawyer that further use of my land without written consent would lead to legal action. Renee emailed back first, a single line, "We didn't know." But that wasn't true. They didn't care to know. They didn't think I mattered enough to be checked. They saw me as the quiet one, the help, the girl in the corner with calloused hands and soft shoulders. They never imagined I had a spine made of steel and soil. The contractors walk away. By Friday, the builders were gone. No permits, no payment. The patio stood half-finished, the guest house skeletal and sour in the sun. The wood creaked when the wind hit it, an empty promise, abandoned, in broad daylight, and every morning my trees grew taller. The gossip begins word spread. Neighbors started whispering. A few even called me. "Is it true you own that stretch of land behind the house?" I always wondered how they could afford all that work. "Your grandmother always said you were the smart one." The family began to panic, quietly. Could feel it in the way Mom's texts changed tone, from, "You're being unreasonable," to, "Can we talk?" to, "Maybe we can work something out." I never replied, because this time they didn't get to dictate the terms. They started calling me the orchard girl behind my back. I heard it first from my cousin Jamie, who still had the decency to check on me sometimes, even if she played neutral. She came by one morning with coffee and a half-hearted smile. "They're losing it," she said, shaking her head. "Uncle Tom's furious. Renee hasn't posted anything in days, and your mom keeps pacing the deck like she's expecting someone to show up and say it was all a mistake." I nodded, barely glancing up from the rows I was digging. My hands were covered in soil, and sweat ran down the side of my face. I was planting wild lavender along the fence line. Something Grandma always said kept the air honest. Jamie set the coffee down on the old tree stump beside me. "They're calling you orchard girl now, like it's an insult." I smiled. "Good," I said. "Let them name what they fear." The plan I wasn't just planting flowers. Every day for the past 2 weeks, I had worked that land like it was sacred. Because it was. To me. To Grandma. To something older than all their paper games and porcelain smiles. I mapped out a proper garden along the southern slope, ordered irrigation materials, called the local ag cooperative and signed up for a community partnership grant. And then I did the thing none of them ever thought I'd do. I filed paperwork to register the land as a public-facing micro-orchard under the name Eloise's Grove. Tribute to my grandmother. A legacy they never saw coming. The confrontation. It didn't take long for the storm to arrive. 3 cars pulled into the edge of the gravel drive just as I was stacking mulch. The crunch of tires, the slamming of doors. I didn't look up until their shadows fell over me. Mom, Aunt Renee, Uncle Tom, all dressed like they were going to Sunday service, polished, proud, and completely out of place among the earth and sweat. "Lena," Renee began, trying to smile, "we've come to talk." I dropped my shovel, stood slowly, waited. Uncle Tom crossed his arms. "This is ridiculous. That land is part of the family estate. You can't just fence it off and build whatever this is." "It's not a fence," I replied. "It's a trellis for raspberries." "That's not what I meant." "I know what you meant, and this isn't your land." Mom stepped forward. "Lena, honey, we all misunderstood the situation. Grandma didn't mean for you to shut us out." I met her eyes, and for the first time in my life I didn't flinch. She meant for me to finally be free of you. Renee's smile cracked. "You can't seriously think this is fair. You already got the land." "No," I cut in. "I got justice. You all took the house, the cars, the antiques, the name. I got soil. And somehow, I'm the only one growing something real with it." The offer, that's when Tom pulled out a folder. A formal purchase offer, $85,000 for the land. He didn't blink as he handed it to me. "We'll even pay closing costs. This is generous, Lena. You can move on. Get a nice condo in the city. Forget all this orchard nonsense." I looked down at the paper. Then slowly, I picked up my shovel again, drove it into the dirt beside my foot, and used the tip to tear the offer in two. "I'm not selling," Renee hissed. "You're going to regret this." I turned my back to them, already halfway down the slope when I called over my shoulder. "You'll regret thinking I was ever for sale." The article 2 weeks later, a local magazine did a feature on Eloise's grove. One of the Adge Co-op volunteers had submitted the story about how a young woman had turned an old family plot into a tribute orchard for her late grandmother. Tudkore. Headline read, "From Forgotten to Flourishing. How one woman reclaimed her family's land and legacy." It included a photo of me standing under the blooming peach trees, hair tied back, gloves dirty, eyes focused. Mom must have seen it. They all did. Because the next day, someone left a note tucked in the gatepost. It was never about the land. It was about control. And now they don't have any. No name. No handwriting I recognized. But it didn't matter. Because they were right. The fence, it wasn't until they tried to sneak in after dark that I built the fence. Just a modest wooden one. 6 feet high. Natural stain. Lined with wildflowers and fairy lights powered by solar. I posted a small metal sign on it. Private land. Owned by Lena McAllister. Trespassers will be prosecuted. And just below it, in smaller script, planted with love. Not permission. The first time someone knocked on the orchard gate, I almost didn't answer. It was a girl, maybe 7 or 8, holding her mother's hand and clutching a mason jar like it was treasure. "Are you the one who grows the peaches?" she asked, eyes wide. I nodded, brushing soil from my palms. "I try." She lifted the jar. Inside were 2 quarters, a button, and a tiny silver heart charm. "I want to buy one. Just one. Mom says I can't afford a whole bag." Her mom flushed, red, murmuring, "We didn't mean to intrude." I reached into the crate and handed the girl the ripest peach I had. Golden red. Warm from the sun. The kind Grandma used to say was honest fruit. "Consider it a gift," I said. That's how it started. The Saturday market. Within a month, I had a folding table, a sign, and a queue. Kids came for peaches and stories. Elders wandered through rows of lavender and smiled like they remembered something forgotten. Volunteers showed up from the ag co-op, bringing homemade labels and seedling donations. What was once a slice of ignored soil had become a sanctuary. I called it the Grove Saturdays. Everything was pay what you can. Some brought coins, some brought nothing. Others left too much. I used the extra to fix up the shed Grandma once used as a potting room. Turned it into a small welcome station with a corkboard full of notes and photos. In the center, a portrait of Grandma Eloise. Below, a plaque. In memory of the only woman who believed the soil still had something to say. The family reacts. That weekend, I saw Aunt Renee standing across the road in her black Mercedes. She didn't come in. She just watched. People were laughing under the apple trees. Someone was playing guitar near the rosemary hedge. A couple of kids were painting signs for the garden beds. Renee looked completely out of place. Like someone who'd arrived at a party she wasn't invited to, only to realize it was better than anything she'd ever hosted. Later that evening, she sent a text. This has gone far enough. I didn't reply, because it hadn't even started. The legal envelope. The next week, I received a thick white envelope from a corporate law office with a name like a chain of marble statues. Halston, Price, and Welder, LLP. Inside, a demand to cease all public events and commerce on the property. The reason? Violation of residential use. They were trying to weaponize zoning codes, bend the rules I'd followed to the letter, claim I had disturbed the neighborhood's residential integrity. That was rich, considering they'd tried to install an illegal guest house on it. But it was more than paperwork. It was war. My response. I went straight to the community board, printed every form, attached every permit, highlighted every clause that protected community agricultural education sites, especially ones with a historic preservation element. Then I emailed the same law firm with the subject line, Correction. Legal use of private agricultural land under County Ordinance 18.4b. I attached a photograph of my signed deed and an article clipping titled, How One Orchard Became the Heart of a Forgotten Town. Then, just to twist the blade a little, I added, P.S. Would you like to sponsor a bench in Eloise's Grove? Tax deductible. The Interview, a local news channel, picked up the story after the magazine article. The anchor walked beside me through the grove as cameras followed. So, Lena, how does it feel, being at the center of something your family tried to erase? Paused beside the rosemary bushes Grandma once dried in the kitchen. I think people forget. You don't have to be loud to be strong. They tried to bury me, I said, turning to face the lens. But I was seed. The footage went viral. Within a week, I had donations, school visits scheduled, and a call from a regional environmental foundation asking if I'd be open to grant-funded preservation. I said yes, but the family wasn't done. The next letter didn't come from lawyers. It came from Mom, handwritten, shaky. Lena, we need to talk. We've made mistakes. Your aunt says we should settle this privately. We never thought things would go this far. I folded the letter and slipped it under a brick, behind Grandma's old watering can, because what they meant was, we never thought you would go this far. The grove grew stronger. I built a bench at the top of the slope. It faced the house. The very same one they stole from me with quiet meetings and forged unity. But now when they looked out their kitchen window, they saw something else. Children reading. Bees moving from bloom to bloom. A wooden sign that read, "This land isn't for sale, but its story is free." And me, the orchard girl, sitting where they swore I'd never rise. I didn't go to the next family meeting, not because I wasn't invited. They never would. But because by then, I didn't need an invitation to a table I helped build, and they tried to steal. But Jamie went, and she called me afterward, her voice shaking between fury and laughter. "They're falling apart, Lena. You should have seen it." The implosion. Apparently Renee wanted to sue me personally now, for emotional distress and defamation by implication. Tom argued it was a waste of time and money, especially after the failed attempt with the zoning violation. Mom cried halfway through and blamed everyone else for making it worse. Then Jamie said something I didn't expect. "They're talking about selling the house." I froze mid-step. "What?" "They can't afford it. Taxes are eating them. They fired the contractor halfway through the build, and now it's just rotting back there. Mold, water damage, all because they extended onto your land without permits. No one will touch the project now." That night, I drove by the main house. I didn't get out, just watched from the ridge. Where they once imagined a luxury guest house stood nothing but warped beams, a sun-bleached tarp, and half-finished tile that now looked like a bad memory. The deck was crooked, the pergola sagged, the grass was gone. Let them rot in marble. Recognition. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the State Preservation Society. They had seen the local coverage of Eloise's grove and wanted to nominate it for a Heritage Land Stewardship Award, a title that came with funding, tax support, and permanent public record acknowledgement. If accepted, the woman explained, your land would be listed in the state's Green Legacy Archive as a model for community-driven land use and intergenerational stewardship. I said yes before she even finished the sentence. Then I emailed the confirmation to Renee. Subject line: Legacy, in case you forgot what that means. They showed up again. This time it was just Mom. She waited until I was packing seedlings into rows, standing awkwardly at the fence line in her pristine sandals, clutching a too expensive purse and a face full of regret. I didn't move to greet her. She let herself in. "You've made your point," she said, not unkindly. "You've won." I straightened, brushing dirt from my arms. "It wasn't a contest. You made it one." She looked down at the soil. "I didn't know. I didn't think you'd want it, that you'd do something with it." "Because you never saw me," I replied. "Not really." She looked older. Then I remembered. Smaller somehow. The power of her presence had cracked. "I was angry you weren't in the will," she admitted. "But it made sense to me. They said you'd leave anyway." I tilted my head. "Maybe I would have, if you hadn't made it so easy." She blinked, caught between understanding and shame. "I miss her," she whispered suddenly. "Your grandmother." I didn't speak. She looked at the orchard, at the rows of color and care. "She would have been proud," she said. She was, while she was still alive. That landed like glass breaking in her chest. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just nodded, slowly, and walked back out, the gate without asking for anything else. The bench at the edge, I installed a second bench near the far end of the orchard, facing the house. Visitors often asked why. I told them, so I can always remember where I came from and how far I've grown." They laughed. Thought I was being poetic, but I wasn't. It was precision. And then came the letter. One quiet evening, just before sunset, I received an envelope that felt different. No stamp, no return address. But the paper was heavy, like the ones Grandma used to write her letters on. Inside was a single page, folded with care. "Lena, if you're reading this, they did exactly what I expected. But I trusted you would too. I left them the house because I knew they'd fight over the walls. I gave you the land because you'd listen to the roots. And roots are what carry us forward. Not chandeliers. Love grows in quiet places. Thank you for planting it, Grandma E." I held the letter like it was breath, folded it gently, and tucked it into the frame of her photo in the welcome shed. The sign went up on a Thursday morning. Estate auction. McAllister property. Main residence. Date, June 17th. Open bidding. No minimum reserve. I drove past it once, then twice, then parked at the corner of the street and just stared. There it was. Their castle, stripped down to price tags and plywood. The house they fought for, manipulated for, celebrated without me in. Now empty. For sale. Like a misjudged heirloom. They never really loved. Only wanted to own. Jamie called. Again. "They're not speaking to each other anymore," she said, half sighing. "Tom blames Renee for pushing the renovation. Renee blames your mom for not managing the optics. And your mom, she just sits in the kitchen like a ghost." I didn't answer right away. Then, "Are you okay?" Jamie hesitated. "I feel like I'm watching people drown in a pool they built themselves." I understood that feeling too well. The auction day. I didn't plan to go. But something in me, not for vengeance but for closure, wanted to witness it. So I came, dressed in a navy sundress, dusty boots, and Grandma's old sun hat. No fanfare, no intent to bid. Just watch. The place looked gutted. The guest house remained unfinished, officially deemed uninhabitable in the listing notes. Mold had spread to the sunroom. The luxury tile was lifting from moisture damage. The plumbing retrofit had been paused, mid-install. Dozens of people walked through, quiet murmurs and folded brochures in hand. Tom stood near the door, fake smile, stiff across his face. Mom sat in the corner, silent. Renee paced. I walked past them without a word. "You should buy it." The auctioneer, an older man in suspenders and sunglasses, saw me in the back row. He squinted. "You here to bid?" "No," I said plainly. He chuckled. "You're Lena, aren't you? Orchard girl?" The nickname was everywhere now. I didn't bother fighting it anymore. He leaned in. "You should buy it. Wrap up the whole story. Irony sells." I looked through the glass window, at the rotting beams, at the deck that sagged like regret, at the house that once housed my childhood, and later my erasure. I smiled. "No," I said. "Let someone else polish that tomb. I'm building something alive." It sold. A young couple bought it, out-of-towners. Wanted to flip it and maybe rent it. They asked to walk the perimeter with me once the sale was finalized. "We know about the orchard," the woman said shyly. "It's kind of what made us want to live here." They were kind, respectful. The man asked, Would you mind if we built a little footpath between the two properties? For guests to visit the grove? I paused, then nodded. Only if it's lined with lavender. Mom came back one last time. She didn't speak right away, just walked slowly along the edge of the grove, trailing her hand over the fence like she was trying to memorize it. "This place smells like her," she whispered finally. I nodded. "That's the rosemary and lemon balm." She turned to me. "I stayed too long in the house. I thought history made it sacred. But maybe it was just walls." I looked at her, eyes steady. "She gave you the house because she knew. You couldn't build one without her." Mom's eyes welled, but she didn't cry. "I'm sorry, Lena," she said. "For all of it." "I know." A long silence passed between us. Not cold, just honest. Then she reached into her bag and handed me a small velvet pouch. Inside was a key. "To the attic," she said. "Grandma told me not to open it until I was ready to be real. The attic, that night, I went back with the key." The house was still empty. The new owners wouldn't move in for another week. I climbed the stairs and unlocked the attic door. Dust floated in shafts of golden light. Trunks lined the back wall. One marked Lena. Inside, sketches I'd made of the orchard at 10 years old, a dried bouquet from my first harvest. Letters Grandma had written to me, but never sent, and a small wooden box with a silver plaque that read, "Things that grow slow, but they stay." The wooden box was heavier than it looked. I carried it down from the attic carefully, like it held something more fragile than time. The plaque on top. "Things that grow slow, but they stay." Felt more like a warning now than a memory. Back in the grove, I set it on the workbench in the shed, beside the framed photo of Grandma, and opened it. Inside were a leather-bound journal, thick with age, a small, hand-etched compass, and a sealed envelope addressed in her handwriting, "To be opened when your roots are deeper than your rage." I sat with that sentence for a long time. Then I opened it, the letter Lena. "By now, you've planted something that's yours, truly yours. That means you've earned the right to know where all this began, and why it had to end the way it did. I didn't leave you the house because I didn't want you trapped in its history. The house was built on appearances, on debt, on silence. But the land was built by hand. My hand, my father's, my grandmother's. What no one knows, what no one ever asked, is that the land wasn't inherited. I bought it, alone. After your grandfather left me with nothing but a child and a bruised reputation. That land saved me, and I've watched it do the same for you. They never asked, never saw the value unless it had marble and mortgage. But you saw it when it was wild and unwanted. This is why you have it. Not because I favored you, but because you were the only one who understood it had a soul. Keep going, Lena. One seed, one root, one season at a time. Grow slower than they can watch, and longer than they can erase. Love always, Grandma E. I don't remember crying, but the letter was damp by the time I folded it back up. I placed it in the back cover of the journal, then turned the first page. It was a map, hand-drawn, of the property before it was ever subdivided. And at the far corner, marked in ink, the buried bell. The bell it took me 3 days to find it. The sketch showed it near the east tree line, where the blackberry brambles grew wild and thorns sliced its skin like secrets. I wore gloves and brought my shovel. Dug slow. Dug careful. On the third morning, the shovel clinked. I knelt down and pulled it loose from the earth, a small iron bell, rusted but intact, the clapper still inside. The handle engraved with initials I didn't recognize. E.M. Eloise McAllister. I cleaned it, polished it, and hung it from the archway over the grove's entrance. A place for every visitor to ring at once, not for luck, not for tradition, but to signal. You're entering something grown with love, not legacy. State recognition. The letter from the State Heritage Commission came 2 weeks later. Eloise's Grove had been officially registered as a protected cultural landmark, with full tax exemption, historic listing, and a commemorative plaque to be installed at the base of the hill. They asked for a photo. I sent them one of Grandma, not posing, just smiling while holding a basket of peaches, her feet covered in dirt and her eyes full of sunlight. They loved it. They wrote back, "This is what preservation is supposed to look like." The family's new chapter, Jamie, told me Aunt Renee moved to Arizona. Tom started flipping houses again, but word had spread. He couldn't get investors. And Mom? She took a job at the local community center. Nothing big, but something real. Jamie said she didn't speak about the will anymore. "They're not angry at you anymore," Jamie told me one afternoon, watching kids play tag between the lavender hedges. "They're angry at themselves." The garden bed, I added a final sign. To the newest bed. A raised stone plot filled with wildflowers, rosemary, and soft marigolds. At the center, a carved marker, Eloise McAllister. She didn't leave me the house. She gave me something stronger. A reason to stay. And below that, in smaller print, things that grow slow. But they stay. The email subject line read, "National Feature Opportunity, American Legacy Landscapes, PBS Special." I reread it 3 times before breathing. They wanted to include Eloise's Grove in a documentary series about women reclaiming generational land in America. The producer said our story felt like a living poem, something that grew beyond revenge. Into healing, they'd fly in, interview the town, walk the rows, film the bell, tell her story, and mine. The producer's visit, her name was Elise. She came with a small crew and a soft voice, asking questions that didn't just scratch at history. They listened for it. When I showed her Grandma's map, the bell, the handwritten letter, she teared up. "She gave you more than land," Elise said. "She gave you roots." We walked past the children's corner of the orchard, where school kids came every Friday now, to plant and name saplings. "They think this is a fairy tale," I smiled. And in a way, maybe it is. It just started with a funeral and a forgotten girl. The choice Elise pulled me aside after filming. "We know you're community-based," she said gently, "but PBS has corporate backers who'd like to invest. They see potential, expansion. You could franchise the Grove model, multiple sites, national." She handed me a folder. Projections, numbers, partnership names. One of them was Heritage Ventures LLC. I recognized it. Tom had once pitched to them before they cut ties. Too many failed flips. Too much family drama in public court records. It felt full circle. And still, I told Elise I'd think about it. The night walk that night, I walked the grove in silence. Every plant felt like a conversation. Every tree a version of myself I had fought to protect. Every root a reminder of what they tried to erase. At the top of the slope, I stood by the bench and looked down at the house, now repainted, alive with laughter again. The couple had turned it into a quiet bed and breakfast. No legacy wars. No greedy hands, just peace. The wind rustled the bell behind me. I whispered to the orchard, "Do I need more?" The answer came not as words, but memory. Grandma's voice. Things that grow, grow slow, but they stay. The final letter. I declined the investment offer. Elise understood. The documentary aired 2 months later. The Orchard Girl, a legacy. Grown in silence. It went viral. People wrote from across the country, survivors of family betrayal, dreamers without land, grandmothers with secrets. Children who never knew love could grow out of spite-soaked soil. And through it all, the grove never stopped blooming. 10 years later, a visitor once asked me, "If you could go back, would you do it all again? Even the betrayal?" I looked at the rows, at the plaque, the children, the bees, the roots, and said, "No one handed me a legacy. They tried to bury me. I planted myself instead." She blinked, smiled. "That should be on the sign." I laughed. "It already is."